y cederle la palabra a Sandy Wattenberg, directora de proyectos de Marea Verde.
Tiene muy chiflado.
She is the Marea Verde Project Director.
Y a todas, bienvenidos y gracias por acompañarnos en este último taller en la serie en el marco del concurso Reciclaje es Cultura. Antes de comenzar, me gustaría comentar que este taller se va a estar haciendo con traducción simultánea. El presentador va a hablar en inglés, pero lo podrán escuchar en español haciendo clic en el botón que tiene la imagen de un globo abajo y que dice interpretación. Ahí pueden seleccionar la opción en español y van a escuchar toda la presentación en español. Ahora, si lo quieren escuchar en el idioma original en inglés, lo pueden dejar así como está y lo van a escuchar en el idioma original. Para ya entrar en el tema, y como muchos saben, este concurso, Reciclaje es Cultura, se creó con el propósito de concientizar y promover la participación de la ciudadanía con respecto a la protección y conservación de los humedales en Panamá, así como también es parte de las acciones de comunicación, educación, concienciación y participación del público, que es un plan conocido como SECOP, para incrementar la conciencia y la comprensión sobre los valores y beneficios que ofrecen los humedales en nuestro país. Entonces queremos agradecer a nuestros patrocinadores, al Fondo Ecológico de Panamá, FIDECO, que está administrado bajo la Fundación Natura, y la Embajada de Israel, y a nuestros aliados, la Sociedad de Algodón de Panamá, el Biomuseo, Star 5 y Grid Galería. Ahora tendremos unas breves palabras del embajador de Israel, cuya embajada es patrocinadora de los premios de este concurso y con los cuales estamos muy agradecidos. Así que les voy a hacer una pequeña introducción del embajador, le voy a dejar las palabras después. El actual embajador de Israel en Panamá, Rea Mansour, se desempeñó como embajador de Israel en Brasil, embajador de Ecuador, embajador adjunto en Portugal, cónsul general de Israel en Atlanta y decano del Cuerpo Consular de Atlanta, y cónsul en San Francisco. El embajador Mansour tiene un doctorado de la Universidad de Haifa, donde su trabajo doctoral se enfocó en la historia intelectual de Siria moderna. También posee una maestría de la Escuela de Gobierno Kennedy en la Universidad de Harvard y habla 5 idiomas, así como estaban comentando antes. El embajador es un activista de larga data en la promoción del diálogo y la integración de las minorías. En reconocimiento por sus esfuerzos para promover el diálogo afroamericano e israelí, fue incluido en la junta del Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. en el prestigioso Morehouse College de Atlanta y galardonado con el premio Primer Ministro y Presidente de Israel y el premio AJC. El embajador Mansour recibió numerosos premios y galardones por su innovador trabajo diplomático, entre ellos el Premio Internacional Héroes de la Excelencia, la Medalla al Mérito Juscelino Kubitschek, en honor al expresidente de Brasil, y el Premio Árbol de la Vida. Fue elegido como uno de los 100 atlantaneses más influyentes, junto con muchas figuras prominentes como el presidente Carter y el miembro del Congreso John Lewis. Además de su carrera diplomática, el embajador Mansour es un autor consumado, ha publicado 4 libros de poesía, así como cantidades de historias cortas. Ha realizado lecturas de sus obras en muchas partes del mundo. El embajador recibió el premio anual de cuentos Haaretz, así como el premio de poesía Miller. Así que les dejo la palabra al señor embajador Rea Mansour. Está en mute, señor embajador.
Ok, ahora sí.
Ahora sí.
Bueno, muchas gracias, Boker Tov, aquí en Panamá. Buenos días a todos. Erev Tov en Israel para el doctor Martin. Voy a comenzar de sus últimas palabras, que para mí habló sobre poesía y sobre cuentos. Este proyecto en Israel de la montaña de Basura es algún tipo de poesía del medio ambiente, porque da mucha inspiración para nosotros. Yo vi esta montaña antes y después y visité algunas veces con mis alumnos en Israel y espero que hoy en día con sus palabras, doctor Martin va a darnos también inspiración a entrar a este tipo de proyectos aquí en Panamá, en diferentes provincias del país, para mantener este país tan lindo para las generaciones del futuro. Estamos muy felices también a continuar esta cooperación especial que empezamos hace algunos meses Y para nosotros queremos que esto sea una visión de trabajo por muchos años, de compartir con Panamá nuestra experiencia en temas de medio ambiente. Ojalá un día podamos nosotros también disfrutar de esta cooperación en Israel y ver proyectos de inspiración en Panamá que podemos implementar en nuestro país. Somos dos países pequeños, entendemos perfectamente la importancia del espacio público y la calidad de vida que puede dar a los habitantes de cualquier país. Y estoy muy feliz que estamos comenzando en esta altura de una figura israelí que sí, la verdad, está atrás de uno de los proyectos mundiales más lindos del mundo, que cambió una región en Israel en manera muy impresionante. Muchos temas en este proyecto que podemos estudiar y tratar de implementar aquí en el país. Así que gracias a todos los participantes, los deseo un proyecto muy positivo para todos nosotros y espero ver del otro lado, porque voy a estar en Israel al final de este proyecto, los resultados lindos que van a salir de estos talleres. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, señor embajador, por estas palabras y definitivamente le vamos a hacer llegar los resultados de este proyecto tan bonito. Estamos todos muy emocionados de ver qué es lo que va a salir de aquí. Y bueno, ahora presentaré brevemente a nuestro invitado especial para el día de hoy, el doctor Martin Weyl, actual director de la Fundación Embajada. Nacido en 1940 en Rotterdam, Países Bajos, Martin Weyl fue un niño sobreviviente del Holocausto que tomó la decisión de construir su futuro en Israel, emigrando al país en 1959. Después de completar su servicio militar obligatorio, se instaló en Jerusalén, donde se inscribió en la Universidad de Hebrea, asumiendo las obras de construcción del futuro Museo de Israel para apoyar sus estudios académicos. Weyl continuaría obteniendo una maestría en el Instituto de Bellas Artes de la Universidad de Nueva York y su doctorado en la Universidad Hebrea de Jerusalén. Tras la apertura del museo, en 1965, Weyl fue contratado como guía en el ala de jóvenes y luego ascendió gradualmente en la escala curatorial como curador de escultura, curador jefe de las artes y en última instancia director en 1981, cargo que ocupó hasta su jubilación en 1996, convirtiéndose en director emérito. Durante sus 15 años como director, el museo disfrutó de una importante expansión de sus instalaciones y sus colecciones. A lo largo de su carrera en el museo, Weyl trabajó en estrecha colaboración con su presidente, el legendario alcalde de Jerusalén, Teddy Kollek, compartiendo su visión de crear un museo que rivalizará con los mejores del mundo. También se desempeñó como asesor de arte de la Municipalidad de Jerusalén, iniciando un programa de arte público de artistas israelíes, así como esculturas emblemáticas para la ciudad de destacados artistas internacionales. Luego de su retiro del Museo de Israel, Martin Weyl concentró sus esfuerzos en temas ambientales, apoyado por la filantrópica Fundación Embajada, en la que desempeñó como director. En esta capacidad, sus logros más conocidos para el país fueron la transformación del vertedero de desecho de Jiriá, cerca de Tel Aviv, en un floreciente parque metropolitano, el florecimiento de las ONG ambientales y una exitosa campaña para brindar sombra del sol en los espacios públicos. En reconocimiento a su contribución a la cultura, el doctor Martin Weyl ha recibido los prestigiosos honores de distinción otorgados por Francia y Holanda, así como muchas instituciones israelíes prominentes, incluida una beca honoraria del Museo de Israel. Antes de pasar la palabra al doctor Weyl, quiero recordar que al final tendremos unos minutos para preguntas y respuestas, así que pueden ir escribiendo sus preguntas a través del chat. Ahora, sin más nada que agregar, le dejo la palabra al doctor Martin Weyl.
Thank you very much. I am sorry I can't see you, so I can't visualize exactly to whom I'm speaking, but since you are in Panama, I imagine myself you sitting there in rows, all with Panama hats on your head, I guess. I will start and show you my first slide, which is my baby. You can see a mountain, which is an artificial mountain. It's not a real one. And it's situated between Tel Aviv, which you see here, with the Mediterranean in the background, sitting in a flood area where the water from the mountains of Judea and Samaria come down every so many years in enormous quantities and flood the whole area, and sometimes also the built-up areas. Two major highways cross right near here. This is the south-north highway, and then there is the Jerusalem-Tel Aviv highway. So this site is actually the most situated in the most central part of the country. We call it the navel of the country. So what happened actually was that in the 50s, the 40s and the 50s, when Tel Aviv was still small and people didn't have much garbage, the garbage was dumped somewhere in this area and it started smelling, and people decided they would have to choose a new site. They chose a site, which is this one, which was bordered by two small rivers, the Ayalon River and the Shapirim River, and the trucks brought the garbage and dumped it here. Now, in the beginning, it was very little, but eventually, over the years, it grew and grew and grew. And in the recent years, the last few years that this site was active, 3,000 tons of garbage a day reached here with trucks and were dumped. And this mountain grew and grew and grew and grew in such a way that it is a kilometer long and it is 60 meters high. So 60 meters, that's quite, that is, if you divide it by 4, it's about 15 stories high. So the trucks would come up here and dump their stuff. I was always very much worried about the impact of such a visually bad environmental wound, I could nearly say. People who would drive here in their cars in the 90s of the last century would close their windows because the smell of this mountain was so bad. And people then didn't have air conditioning yet. So it was really terrible, the smell. Now, to remember that we were able to create this into a park, but we are now also working in the whole area around the mountain to turn it into a large metropolitan park. In 1999, the site was closed and the garbage was being brought to a transfer station that you see here. From there, the garbage was taken in larger trucks to the south and put somewhere in the desert in the ground. The site was closed because right here on this side of the other side of the road is the central airport of Israel. And there were so many birds here, tens of thousands of birds circling around the garbage, that endangered the flight path to the airport. Could I have the next slide, please? Here you can see the trucks dumping the garbage. The next slide. And here you can see the site not from above, but from the side, from the north. And you can see that it is a kilometer long. Now, such a site is not it's not a Disneyland. It's dangerous because of all the garbage that's being dumped there. It has dangerous toxic fumes, and some places, since it was not strengthened, the sites would collapse. So the site was closed by the people in charge and became an area that the public could not see, but where terrible things happened in my mind. Yes, the next slide, please. Here gives you an example of how the site looked like. You can see here the truck dumping the garbage, and then bulldozers moving the garbage to the site. Sometimes people would be standing till their waist in the middle of the garbage and try to scavenge and still save things that would be thrown away. So when I left my job in the Israel Museum, I retired. I thought, what could I do to see if I could change the image of this terrible environmental eyesore? Now, since I had worked in a museum, I thought what I could try to do was to change the concept of the public towards the site by making an exhibition. Besides having a terrible smell, the public was not very aware of the site since it was so close. So I asked permission of the people in charge to go up there and have a look about what I could do. But I was not allowed to go up there because it was dangerous, they said, and it smelled too bad, and the noise of the birds was terrible. So I had no choice to go up clandestinely there. I took a lift with a garbage truck. And I remember the driver saying to me, "Hey, pal," he said, "I'm not so sure you want to go up there. You will be coming down, you will be smelling so badly that your girlfriend won't take you to bed afterwards anymore." But I was stubborn and I decided to go up. And when I reached and I saw this spectacle, it reminded me of paintings by Hieronymus Bosch and the images of hell in medieval paintings. So I became more obsessed with doing something about it. And in the end, next slide, please. This is again a way where now the transfer, they show you the bulldozers moving all the plastic garbage and all the organic garbage aside. Yes, the next slide, please. So since I had this background in the arts and in curatorship, I decided that the only tool I had available to me was the tool of a curator. And I started striving to make a large exhibition in the Tel Aviv Museum and ask for proposals by artists about what it would be possible to do with this mountain after it would close. And as I said, it took quite a bit of convincing, it's a long story, to convince those people to let me and the artist up there. But in the end, they knew the place was going to be closed, and actually nobody had thought about what to do with the site after it would be closed. So I did this exhibition in the Tel Aviv Museum, 10 artists from abroad and 10 artists from Israel, all in the most well-known artists who had shown an interest in the environment. And they came to visit, and they were together with me here one Friday morning on top of the mountain. And they started throwing garbage at each other and laughing. And one artist, Vito Acconci, said, "Where do I throw my cigarette away?" He didn't realize he was standing on the garbage mountain. And after a while, suddenly I saw two convoys of trucks coming up the mountain, and they appeared to be the two major television stations in Israel who had heard that something strange was going on the garbage mountain, and they came to film us and ask us what we are doing. As a result, without even the exhibition having started yet, we were on prime time news on Israel television, and this created quite a buzz and interest in what was going on in the mountain. Next slide, please. Now, the suggestions of the artists were interesting. They were not always very practical. This is by an Israeli artist, for example, who decided that we should create a recycling facility or hollow out the mountain from the inside and create a recycling facility inside the mountain. His name is Micha Ullman. Next slide, please. This is an interesting artist. I called her, she was American, and I called her to New York if she would participate in the exhibition, and she closed the phone on me. I called again, and she said, "Oh, I thought you were making fun of me. It was one of my friends who was making fun of me. I didn't know that you were serious. And I always dreamt my whole life to do something with that mountain." And she gave us several proposals. I show you here two of them. One of them shows that on the four corners, she would create colored geysers. Geysers, you know, that steam, that very, very light steam, that would be colored. And the colors would indicate the condition of the environment in the various parts of the country. So if in the south there would be a lot of pollution, the geyser would turn red. On the other side, if it would be good, the geyser would turn green. And on top of the mountain, she suggested we put an enormous table of 200 meters long where people would come and discuss the whole situation of the environment in Israel. But she looked at it as a slumbering monster, and she suggested that at night we would project on the sides of the mountain projections of the history of Israel and the leaders of the Israel Zionist movement. So this was a very interesting, in a way, proposal. Next. This was, again, another environmental proposal. An Israeli artist who simply suggested to put many, many receptors, solar panels on top of the mountain and use the energy to create at night enormous colored beams that would go to heaven, that would go up above, which was also an interesting suggestion. Next. This was by an American artist, very well known by the name of Vito Acconci, and he suggested to create an autarkic society on top of the mountain, where the mountain would be able to grow its own food and where people would live in a very protected manner, where everything would be taken care of. A light rail would go around the mountain, and houses would be built on the sides that would overlook the plains. Next slide, please. This is difficult to see, but this was made by a Chinese artist by the name of Chai. He became very famous now. He suggested several things. He suggested, first of all, because he works a lot with fireworks, he suggested to blow up the whole mountain with fireworks. Now, here in Israel, we are very experienced with blow-ups, and that was not very practical. It's not a very good idea. So we asked him more ideas, and he suggested that we create on top of the mountain, made out of stone, the huge image of a dinosaur. And this dinosaur would have a healing influence. People would be able to walk, and let's say they would walk on the head, on the stones, and if they had a headache, this would heal them according to ancient Chinese medical theories. So he saw the whole process in a way of healing. He suggested creating all kind of spices for healing on the mountain. And in a sense, it was also a beautiful project. Yes, the next slide. This was also an interesting artist, an Israeli architect who based himself, I think, on Mount Fuji in Japan. He thought we should put beautiful trees that would flower on the mountain and create a lake around it. Next. But as I said, this mountain is not so easily solvable and healable, and many of the artists' suggestions were very utopian, and there were many others, and they were very beautiful. I brought out a large catalog with it, which I think by now is even sold out. But I give you here an example of the gas we had to collect from the mountain, because enormous amount of methane coming out of it, since a lot of organic waste was also disposed there. So there were many engineering problems that the artist couldn't solve. And I realized that even though we could take into account some of the proposals by the artist, we couldn't really let them handle it by themselves. So I had then several options, because after the exhibition closed, I had asked also the environmental organizations to be involved in the exhibition and to help further the idea of recycling, and that we had to solve the whole recycling idea. I asked the municipality of Tel Aviv to put a garbage truck on top of the museum, but they didn't allow that. But still, many people came to see the exhibition, and then the question suddenly arose, what do we do now? Now, I could ask architects to then design the future of the mountain, but I didn't want this mountain to become a heap of concrete and an architectural masterpiece. I was much more interested in the aspect of healing the mountain and healing nature and bringing a message of dealing with recycling. So I did several steps. I approached landscape architects. Now, landscape architects are not a kind of discipline that was very much known or appreciated. If I ask you, gave me the name of a famous landscape architect of the 20th century. I'm sure a few of you will know to give me an answer. You all know names of famous architects, of course, or of artists like Picasso, Matisse, but the great parks in Europe were made in the 19th century, in the middle of the 19th century, by the way, as a result of pandemics, like Central Park in New York or the parks in London and all that. They were made in the 50s and the 60s of the 19th century. And in the 20th century did not make parks. So this was a good opportunity to approach them and see if they could turn this whole site into something remarkable that would reflect the idea of healing and create the mountain into an icon that would also be a beacon of the environmental approach and the problems of climate change in Israel. Next. I then brought in many of these landscape architects together to create a master plan. And we made a charrette, that's called, that about all the people I invited. And by that time I had the support of a philanthropic organization to bring all these people and see how we could continue with the planning. In the end, I made a competition of 4 landscape architects. Of this competition, one was chosen, and I presented all the proposals of the landscape architects again in an exhibition in the Tel Aviv Museum. So it was all the time involving the public, presenting creative ideas, and trying to get the public more and more involved. Next. But then I thought that even if we would make a beautiful mountain covered with flowers and all that, it would cover up the environmental messer. And I approached the district planners and I said, let's try to direct recycling factories to the environment of this mountain. And in these recycling factories, we will show the children how one should actually recycle so as not to create an ugly mountain as had been done before. So here you see, for example, a recycling facility. I was able to attract several of them. Recently, a very sophisticated one with German technology. But the first ones were simple ones like this one, a recycling facility of building waste, in which the building waste was turned into gravel, and the gravel we could use to fortify the mountain with terraces and so on. The next one. This was a recycling factory where the organic waste was separated from the non-organic waste. It was able to digest about 15 tons a day, and the organic waste then was made into gas again that we were able to sell to the textile factory not far from the mountain. And the plastics we were able to put into bales, and the bales were sent abroad. The metals were also separated and recycled. Next one. Then, since they had in the beginning made a compost factory near the mountain, the compost factory failed and it fell into decay. I suggested we change the compost factory into an educational center for recycling. And this became a big success. the guidance I gave to the architects who designed this was that everything, including the building itself, should be made out of recycled material. So you see, for instance, chairs made of garbage bins, the whole desk made out of plastic recycled bottle, lamps made out of plastic bags, and so forth and so forth. While on the sides there were being studios where children could make the things out of recycled materials that we collected. Next, please. Here, this is the old compost factory, now made into a lovely, beautiful recycling educational center. And I want you to know that the success with the children was enormous, more than with the parents, in such a way that we got reactions that actually the children started forcing the parents to start recycling. You have to realize that I'm talking about 15, 20 years ago, when the whole idea of the environment and recycling here in Israel was quite recent and new. Yes, next one. This was the proposal made by a German landscape architect by the name of Peter Latz, who won the competition. The mountain itself was kept intact because he said it looks like an archaeological Middle Eastern formation, a tell, and he wanted to keep that as it is. Around the tell, there should be terraces that we made already, that were made out of recycled garbage waste, and then covered with beautiful citrus yards and parks around. So since he won this competition, that was in 2005, the park we have been developing with the help of the government. The next slide. This is an outlook, an observation point from the mountain where you can see the whole suburban area, this area of Tel Aviv, the urban area, and the floodplains around it that will also be turned into a park. Yes, next one. So this is what happened with the park on top of the mountain. We had to cover the whole mountain with a plastic sheet because nothing could grow while the methane gas was coming out of it. And on top of the plastic garbage sheet, we have to put a meter of good earth, and only then could we start planting trees and shrubs and so forth. We also changed the top of the mountain into a V shape so that in winter, water could be collected into ponds, of which you see here a few. Part of them are underground. So while we collect this water in the winter, we can use it for irrigation in the summer. Next one. So this is how the park looks now, far from being a garbage mountain, as you can see. And we are still in the beginning of the making of the park, but we are getting there, and there is more and more awareness. And I hope that this mountain will indeed, as I dreamt, will become, in a way, our entrance card, carte de visite to Israel, that will be a beautiful icon, like the United States has the Statue of Liberty and France has the Eiffel Tower, and we would have a beautiful recycled garbage mountain as a symbol of rejuvenation and of the repair and the attitude to nature that should be more respectful and more to the point. So I all invite you to come and join me and visit this beautiful park. That is more or less what I wanted to tell you. And now I'm open to some questions, if that's okay with you.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias, doctor Weyl, por esta presentación tan interesante e inspiradora. Realmente, pues yo estoy en completo shock al ver cómo de una montaña de basura crearon este parque tan bonito. Y bueno, nos deja en una nota positiva al ver que otros países han logrado crecer y mejorar en el ámbito de manejo de desechos, lo cual nos da también un ejemplo y nos incentiva a tomar acciones aquí en Panamá. Entonces, ahora abrimos un espacio para preguntas y respuestas en donde podrán tener la oportunidad de hacer las preguntas al doctor Weyl. Pueden ir escribiéndolas por el chat. Acá ya tenemos algunas. La primera dice, ¿qué medidas de ingeniería se utilizaron para que los ríos o afluentes que estaban a los lados no se contaminaran?
The contamination that was most dangerous for the environment were the fluids that came out of the mountain. It has a special name, I forgot them now, but we were able to collect the fluids and recycle them also in a small little plant at the foot of the mountain in such a way that the fluids would be transformed from toxic to gray water. And luckily, the land around the mountain is alluvial and was not contaminated too much by the fluids of the mountain.
Gracias. Bueno, la siguiente pregunta dice, ¿cuánto tiempo dedicaron a las consultas, integración de actores relevantes al proceso de design thinking?
Well, I started becoming interested in 1996, so that is already 25 years ago. But the exhibition I made in the year 2000 only. And then with all, it's a long story, but we had to go through a process of zoning and of permits by the government that took a few more years, which were hard battles to fight because real estate people wanted to build in this park. And it was actually by the help of the late Prime Minister, Mr. Ariel, Sharon, that we'll be able to secure the park for the park, and that's why it is called in his name. So it's still ongoing. It's a government company now that runs the park, and we have a small staff of about 20 people. And I came on the board lately. Before, I didn't want to be on the board because I wanted to be critical and be able to manage from the outside. But I realized that at this stage, it was important I come on the board to give my input as much as I could.
Muchas gracias. La siguiente pregunta dice, ¿cómo fue el proceso de investigación de estos procesos industriales para transformar el medio contaminado? Principalmente con una formación de artista. ¿Fue un desafío empezar a estudiar estas técnicas? ¿Cuánto tiempo le tomó?
Well, here since we didn't have the experience in Israel, we had to bring in engineering firms from abroad who came here, did research and produced enormous volumes of research of the issues of the mountain that were then afterwards used by the landscape architect so he could, for his information. but that there are firms, and we brought in a firm from the United States, but there are firms who are specialists in what is called brown areas or contaminated sites. And since this was such a site, they were able to deal with it accordingly. But it's complicated and it requires a lot of knowledge. For example, you have to realize that this mountain will become smaller by 10% over the years. And at a certain point, also the gas will leave the mountain. But of course, much of the toxic elements will remain.
Ok, aquí otra pregunta. ¿Cómo fue la inclusión de la comunidad desde el diseño hasta la construcción de este proyecto?
Community around. Well, first of all, the fact that I made those exhibitions meant that we were completely transparent with the community, and we took on a person to advise us on how to include the community of the people who live around the area. It has become by now a quite dense urban site, and we wanted very much the public to be involved and to be advised so that everything be transparent. And we are constantly working on it by inviting them. They formed a committee with the cities around. 3 of the mayors of the cities around the park are also part of the board of directors, so they get their information in that way. And also in all the stages of the planning, we took care to invite community leaders of different kinds to get their input and their wishes.
Gracias. La siguiente pregunta dice, costos del proceso de transformación. ¿Cómo obtuvieron los recursos y fondos para el diseño y construcción?
Well, as I mentioned to you, I was able to secure the support of a private foundation in the beginning for all the planning, which was rather expensive, and it was very open-minded of this foundation that saw the potential of this park still to put a lot of money into making an exhibition on garbage. Was quite enlightened by them. But then after we were making progress with the planning, we went to the government, and since this is government land and the Prime Minister decided to make this a government project, this foundation proposed to the government a matching situation in which the foundation would put in the first significant sum on condition that it would be matched by the government. And this enabled us to get the whole project off the ground. We're talking about something like $40 million that were put in so far in the park. I guess that to complete the project, we'll need about $150 million, which I think should also be used. We should be able to fundraise by private donors, part of it at least. But since this is also a project that has to be with drainage problems, and the drainage problems are very serious, the government also realized that it's their responsibility to solve the drainage problems, and therefore they will also put quite a considerable amount of money in solving these drainage problems, which then will enable us to create the large part of the park. give you an example, we have to dig an enormous wadi to channel the water that comes very suddenly. You have to catch the water for a few moments to channel it in a certain way. In order to do that, we have to dig a huge wadi, which will become part of the park, and to take out about 6 million cubes of earth. This we can then put in the park and create already the morphology of the future.
Muchas gracias, doctor Weyl. Acá hay un comentario que no es sobre la presentación, pero dice que no se le ha enviado el formulario para...
No tiene el audio activado.
¿No me escuchan?
Don't hear.
No se le escucha el audio está desactivado, creo.
¿Me escuchan ahora?
Sí, buenos días, sí se escucha.
Okay.
Now I can hear you again. Yes.
Ok, perfecto, muchas gracias.
No,
No sé
no.
qué.
Don't hear you.
¿No se escucha?
Sí se escucha.
Ok,
Sí, yo escucho.
ok.
Don't hear Sandy.
Escuchamos bien.
Él tiene, déjame lo escribir. Es que creo que
Good.
quizás tiene el volumen apagado.
She's not speaking to me.
Ok, bueno, acá dice que alguien que no se le ha enviado el formulario en los talleres
Someone is
anteriores,
saying that the form hasn't been sent.
que no han estado recibiendo los correos, pero cuando revisan las bandejas de correos no deseados o de promociones, están los correos ahí. Entonces, pues les recomendamos que revisen estas bandejas también. No sabemos por qué está pasando esto, ya intentamos revisarlo, pero es algo que debe ser de la configuración de cada correo particular. Entonces, sí les pedimos que revisen estas bandejas para estar pendientes de los formularios. Se ha enviado un formulario para que llenen sobre sus datos y luego el 5 de julio se va a estar enviando el formulario para que puedan subir todos los detalles de la obra. Se les va a pedir las fotos y una pequeña descripción sobre qué los inspiró. Y este formulario va a estar abierto hasta el 11 de julio. Ese día se va a cerrar ya el proceso de presentación de obras para que el jurado entonces las pueda evaluar. Y el 26 de julio vamos a tener la presentación. Como dijimos en las bases del concurso, se van a preseleccionar 20 esculturas y luego 5 van a ser calificadas como las ganadoras. Entonces, a los preseleccionados los vamos a estar contactando antes del 26 de julio para comunicarles que han sido preseleccionados y también para invitarles al evento de premiación que vamos a estar haciendo el 26 de julio. Entonces, creo que ya no hay más preguntas. Y si no hay más preguntas, pues no me gustaría quitarles más de su tiempo, es domingo, así que para que vayan a terminar de disfrutar el día.
I just want to say that there is a site on the web called the Ariel Sharon Park for people who are more interested in details.
Muchas gracias, doctor Weyl. Así que bueno, ahí está. No sé si podemos escribir el nombre del site acá en el chat para que lo podamos revisar. Pero bueno, muchísimas gracias primeramente al doctor Weyl por su presentación, a la Embajada de Israel por hacer este taller posible, a nuestros patrocinadores y a nuestros aliados, y a todos ustedes por participar en este taller. Como dije, vamos a estar enviando el próximo correo para el 5 de julio con el enlace para presentar las esculturas. Y bueno, va a estar abierto hasta el 11 de julio, en donde ya vamos a cerrar el proceso de presentación. Bueno, estamos muy ansiosos por ver todas las esculturas y bueno, muchísimas gracias por participar en todos los talleres, en este taller, y que tengan un feliz domingo.
Gracias a ustedes.
Igualmente me gustaría añadir un agradecimiento a todos los que participaron hoy de parte de la Embajada de Israel y de parte de Marea Verde. Un agradecimiento muy, muy especial al doctor Martin Weyl por ser nuestro orador estrella de esta tarde y buen domingo a todos. Dr. Martin Weyl, would like to take the opportunity to thank you on behalf of the Embassy of Israel and on behalf of Maria Verde for being our keynote speaker, and wish you a good Sunday.